Victoria had always possessed an allure, a captivating presence that drew attention wherever she went, but tonight something was different. The air crackled with a subtle energy, a shift in the atmosphere that hinted at a transformation not just in how others perceived her, but in how she perceived herself and perhaps even her marriage. The evening began with an air of effortless sophistication as she and Alexander strolled into the party hosted by one of his college friends. The room buzzed with laughter and conversation, the aroma of fine whiskey mingling with the scent of expensive perfume, creating an atmosphere of relaxed indulgence. Alexander introduced Victoria to his friends, his arm possessively draped around her waist. His voice warm yet laced with a subtle possessiveness, but Victoria noticed the way their gazes lingered on her. A predatory hunger in their eyes that sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't the first time she had attracted such attention, but tonight there was an edge to it, a primal undercurrent that resonated with a hidden desire within her. Alexander, with a casualness that belied the tension simmering beneath the surface, uttered a remark that shifted the entire dynamic of the room. Victoria could charm anyone here, declared his voice light yet laden with a suggestive undertone. A silent understanding passed between his friends, an unspoken challenge, a dare that hung heavy in the air as the night progressed, and the whiskey flowed freely. The atmosphere grew charged with a dangerous energy game. Once innocent and playful, the banter laced with a double entendre that made Victoria's pulse quicken. She found herself at the center of their attention, their gazes tracing her every move, the room thrumming with anticipation. It began with a simple dare, a playful suggestion that she kissed someone other than her husband. Victoria's heart pounded in her chest, the air thickening with unspoken desires, but when she looked at Alexander, she saw not disapproval but a challenge, a silent permission that emboldened her. The kiss was electrifying, a forbidden thrill that sent shivers down her spine as her lips met another's. A wave of excitement washed over her, a dangerous curiosity awakening within her in that single charged moment. Victoria felt a shift within herself, a transgression that both unsettled and intrigued her. The kiss set the stage for a descent into forbidden territory. The glances grew bolder, the drinks flowed faster, and Victoria felt her own inhibitions begin to crumble. Victoria felt the intoxicating thrill coursing through her veins, a rush fueled by the attention and the forbidden nature of the game. The dares escalated, each one pushing her further into uncharted territory, a realm of sensuality and transgression she had never dared to explore. William's eyes followed her every move. His gaze was intense, a mixture of possessiveness, jealousy, and a darker emotion she couldn't quite decipher. It was as if his silent observation fueled her audacity, urging her to push the boundaries further under William's watchful gaze. Victoria allowed herself to be drawn deeper into the game, each dare bolder than the last, each action laced with a forbidden intimacy. The atmosphere in the room crackled with tension, the air thick with unspoken desires. The men, captivated by her every move, watched with rapt attention, their comments growing bolder, their intentions clear. One of William's friends dared her to sit on his lap. Victoria hesitated, feeling the weight of William's gaze upon her, but only for a fleeting moment. Then, with a defiant tilt of her chin, she complied, settling onto the man's lap, acutely aware of the ripple of excitement that coursed through the room. His hands rested firmly on her hips, sending a shiver down her spine. A mixture of fear and exhilaration, the other men's gazes followed her every move, their words growing more suggestive, their intentions are more explicit. Victoria's pulse quickened as she grasped the unspoken agreement that hung heavy in the air. A line had been crossed, a boundary breached, and the thrill of transgression was intoxicating. Emboldened by the charged atmosphere, Victoria's actions grew bolder, her inhibitions melting away with each pass. Dare she revel in the attention and the power she held over these men? The forbidden desires she ignited within them made her the center of their universe, the object of their collective desire, and the thrill of it was intoxicating throughout it all. Alexander remained a silent observer, his gaze fixed on her, his expression unreadable, yet a hint of dark satisfaction played at the corners of his lips as if he derived pleasure from her surrender to their game. The weight of his gaze and the unspoken tension between them fueled her audacity, pushing her further into the depths of this forbidden realm. Victoria on the edge, torn between the exhilaration of the moment and the fear of the consequences. The allure of the forbidden was too strong to resist. As the night wore on, she surrendered, completely embracing the power and the danger of her transgression. Venturing deeper into the shadows of desire, this was no longer a game. It was a descent into a realm of forbidden desires, a dangerous dance on the precipice of no return. As the tension in the room thickened and palpable electricity crackled in the air, Victoria knew that whatever happened next would irrevocably alter the course of her life. It wasn't long after Victoria took that first fateful step, kissing another man under Alexander's watchful gaze, that the night spiraled further out of control. William's friends, emboldened by her compliance, proposed a new game, one that transcended mere words and playful dares, a game that demanded a more intimate, more daring surrender. Their eyes gleamed with a predatory hunger, a desire that Victoria could feel deep within her, a mixture of fear and excitement that made her heart pound against her ribs. The first dare was deceptively simple. Unbutton your blouse. Such a small act, yet the way they watched, their gazes stripping her bare, made it feel like so much more. Victoria hesitated, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the buttons. The silence in the room amplifying the frantic beating of her heart. Alexander stood in the corner, his expression unreadable, but the darkness in his eyes was unmistakable. He wasn't going to stop this. He wasn't going to say a word, and so Victoria complied. One button at a time, she exposed herself to their hungry gazes, feeling the heat of their stares as her skin was revealed. It was an agonizingly slow process, each button undone a step further into the abyss of forbidden desires. When the last button was released and her blouse fell open, she could feel the collective intake of breath, the room holding its breath as if savoring the moment. But they weren't done, not by a long shot. Their attention was now fully focused on Victoria, the dares escalating, becoming more explicit, more demanding. One of Williams's friends, the one with the confident smirk and the unwavering gaze, dared her to kiss him. It was a dare she had already faced, but this time the stakes were higher, the implications more profound. This time it wasn't just a kiss. It was a statement, a declaration of her willingness to surrender to their desires. The kiss lingered, the electricity between them undeniable. Victoria felt a rush of exhilaration, the thrill of breaking the rules, of defying the boundaries she had once held sacred. The other men watched, their gazes searing into her, feeding off the forbidden display, the palpable tension that crackled in the air. And then, like a dam breaking, the dares came fast and furious, each one pushing Victoria further into a realm she barely imagined herself performing. Not even in her wildest fantasies, became a reality. The men, emboldened by her compliance, began taking turns exploring her body with an attitude that left Victoria breathless and breathless. A thrill both terrifying and exhilarating coursed through her. A dangerous cocktail of shame and excitement that she couldn't shake off. But what unsettled her most and made her heart clench with a fear that transcended mere desire was William's silence, his tacit approval of the escalating situation. He was there, always lurking in the shadows, his gaze fixed on her as his friends took liberties with his wife, yet he remained his expression, a dark, brooding presence that fueled Victoria's apprehension. It was his passive acceptance that unraveled her more than any of the increasingly intimate dares. The game spiraled further, the men pushing the boundaries, their demands escalating until Victoria's eyes asked to shed all pretense of modesty to bare herself completely before their hungry eyes, every fiber of her being screamed in, urging her to resist, to reclaim her dignity, but a force stronger than reason, a potent mix of fear and forbidden her forward. With trembling hands she complied, her body exposed, vulnerable under their collective gaze. A wave of shame washed over her, yet beneath it, a thrill coursed through her veins, a dangerous exhilaration that both terrified and excited her. Victoria could feel their eyes on her, tracing every curve and every contour of her exposed body. Their gazes devoured her, stripping her, reducing her to an object of their collective desire. It was as if she had become a prize in a twisted pawn in a power play orchestrated by her husband. Williams's friends took their turns, each one pushing the boundaries further, touches growing more intimate, more possessive, and through it all, Alexander remained a silent observer, his gaze unwavering, a dark satisfaction lurking in his eyes. Victoria's mind reeled, trying to comprehend his motives, his silent complicity and her humiliation. Why wasn't he stopping this? Why wasn't he pulling her out of this nightmare that had begun as a playful game? Then, with clarity that cut through the haze of alcohol and arousal, the truth dawned on her. Alexander was enjoying this. He was revising her submission in the degradation she was enduring at the hands of his friends. This was what he needed to see her stripped of her dignity and reduced to nothing more than an object of their collective desire. The realization shattered something within her, a fragile trust that had been the foundation of their relationship. This was no longer a game. It was a descent into a dark abyss, a terrifying freefall into a world of twisted desires and power dynamics. The night was far from over, and Victoria knew with sickening certainty that whatever lay ahead would forever alter the course of her life. There's a limit, a boundary to how far one can be pushed, a point where the mind, if not the body, rebels, refusing to go any further. But Victoria had crossed that threshold long ago, her will crumbling under the weight of the night's transgressions. The games, the dares had morphed into something sinister, a perverse exploration of power and submission that went far beyond the realm of playful exploration, and it wasn't over yet. A heavy silence descended upon the room, thick with anticipation and a palpable sense of dread. Then one of William's friends, the one who always seemed to relish pushing the boundaries, issued a dare that sent a shock wave through their gazes burned into her, waiting for her response. Victoria paused, the weight of the dare hanging heavy in the air. This was different, a deeper violation, a more intimate surrender than anything that had come before. Her eyes flickered towards Alexander, hoping for a sign of disapproval, a flicker of protectiveness that would pull her back from the precipice. But all she got was a silent nod, a subtle encouragement that sealed her fate. Alexander, her husband, the man who had vowed to cherish and protect her, was giving her permission to debase herself further. A rush of nausea flooded over her, but it was swiftly replaced by a weird mix of shame and forbidden excitement. With trembling hands, Victoria knelt before the man, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt their eyes on her, the weight of their collective gaze burning into her skin. The room held its breath, a silent audience to this act of degradation, a spectacle both sacred and profane. As she performed the act, the atmosphere shifted once more. The playful banter that had once filled the air was replaced by a primal tension, a dangerous undercurrent that crackled with unspoken desires. The guys watched, their eyes filled with lust and a possessive hunger, delighting in the power they possessed over her. One by one, each man seizes his treasure. Victoria became a vehicle for their collective wishes. Her mind detached from her body. She floated above the scene, a detached observer to her own degradation. There was no room for thought, no space for resistance, only the primal act itself and the reactions it elicited from the men who watched. She tried to cling to a shred of control, a semblance of dignity, but with each man, another layer of her resistance crumbled. Victoria felt her sense of self slipping away, dissolving into the depths of submission with each passing moment. The realization sent a shiver down her spine, a perverse thrill mixed with a chilling fear. The men's voices grew louder, their words crude and objectifying, stripping away any remaining vestiges of her humanity. But Victoria was too far gone to protest, too lost in the intoxicating vortex of submission to care. She was an object now, a plaything for their amusement, and the knowledge of that fact, though degrading, ignited a spark of forbidden excitement within her. The desire that mixed with the humiliation, the ecstasy that danced alongside the degradation. How could she take pleasure from the same act of being dehumanized? But she did, and the shame of that awareness just enhanced the experience, pushing her farther into the depths of this forbidden domain. Alexander remained in the background, a silent observer to his wife's descent into degradation. His expression was unreadable, a mask that concealed the storm of emotions raging within him, but Victoria could sense the darkness in his eyes, a twisted satisfaction that chilled her to the bone. His desire was palpable, which only heightened Victoria's humiliation and betrayal. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized she had crossed a threshold, a point of no return. The weight of that knowledge was crushing, but there was a perverse thrill mixed with the shame, a forbidden excitement that she couldn't deny. She had entered a world she never knew existed, a realm of submission and degradation that both terrified and exhilarated her. The darkness within her, the part she had always kept hidden, was now unleashed, and she found herself both repulsed. The night continued in an endless loop of obedience and humiliation. William's friends took turns pushing Victoria further, her body responding despite the turmoil in her mind and the shame that gnawed at her soul. She was no longer in control, no longer the woman she had been just an hour before. The Victoria who had entered that party was gone, replaced by a creature of their creation, a vessel for their desires. As the night wore on and Victoria sank deeper into the abyss, she felt a strange detachment from her own body, as if she were watching Victoria stumble into the sanctuary of the bathroom, the door clicking shut behind her, the sound echoing the finality of her transformation. The Rubicon of our relationship had been crossed, and there was no escaping the intoxicating pull of our forbidden desires, no turning back from the path we had embarked on. The harsh fluorescent light lit her reflection in the mirror, revealing a twisted visage that barely resembled the lady she previously knew. Victoria is confident and confident. Who had entered the party? This was a stranger, a ghost of her former self, her eyes wide with a haunting blend of shock and a rising darkness. She searched her reflection for explanations and a glimmer of the woman she had been, but all she found was stark evidence of her degradation. The phantom touch of their hands lingered on her skin, a frightening reminder of their violations. Their ravenous gazes scorched into her memories, mocking her obedience, and Alexander, her husband, the man who had promised to protect and cherish her, had stood by as a silent partner to her humiliation. His tacit approval of his voyeurism, she splashed cold water on her face, acknowledging the shame she had willfully accepted. A desperate attempt to cleanse herself of the lingering touch of those men, to wash away the shame that clung to her like a shroud, but it was a futile effort. The water mingled with her tears, tracing a path down her cheeks, a physical manifestation of the inner turmoil that raged within her. The tears that streamed down Victoria's face were a testament to the irreversible transformation she had undergone. There was no escaping the reality of her choices, no undoing the events. Her husband remained a mute observer, his eyes dark with approval, his arousal a plain exhibition of his twisted fantasies. He savored in her degradation, his silence a tacit acceptance of their depravity. The guys empowered by her surrender lost no time in pushing the boundaries further. The fragile shell of social etiquette had crumbled, leaving only a raw need in its wake. They demanded more, their words laced with possessive entitlement, and Victoria, her head numb, her body a simple receptacle for their needs, she found herself agreeing with each demand, each degrading act a step deeper into the abyss, a spiral of shame and forbidden pleasure from which she couldn't escape. She was a puppet, her strings pulled by their insatiable desires, her own will dissolving into the intoxicating haze of submission, and then the competition began. Williams's friends, fueled by a perverse need to conquer and possess six for her attention, their twisted game escalating with each passing moment. Victoria was no longer a person. In their eyes, she was a prize, a trophy to be claimed. Her humiliation was a source of perverse pleasure. The shame was unbearable, but her body betrayed her, responding to their touch with a forbidden arousal that disgusted and thrilled her in equal measure. She was trapped in a vicious cycle of degradation and desire, unable to break free from the intoxicating pull of their depravity. One of them, his voice full of predatory intent, recommended pushing the game to a new degree of violation. Victoria's breath hitched in her throat, a wave of dread washing over her. She wanted to scream and run to escape the clutches of their twisted desires, but her body refused to obey her voice trapped in her throat. They led her to the bedroom, a dark, intimate space that symbolized the final surrender, the ultimate loss of control. The bed loomed before her, a monstrous altar upon which she was to be sacrificed, a stark reminder of everything she had already lost. And as she approached the bed, a chilly pram swept over her, tightening its icy grip around her heart. Victoria could feel their eyes burning into her, tearing away the last vestiges of her dignity, her resistance shattering under the weight of their collective gaze. They took turns with her, each guy pushing her deeper to test her boundaries. Breaking down the walls she had constructed around herself, she battled to keep a semblance of control, but with each act of submission, she felt herself falling further away, losing herself in the abyss of their demands. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and misery, her body a puppet dancing to their song, her own volition a distant echo, and through it all, Alexander stared from the doorway, his presence a lurking shadow. His arousal was a brutal reminder of his complicity in her degradation. He delighted in her humiliation, and his silence was a loud testament to his twisted wants. Victoria was no longer herself. She was lost, broken, a mere shell of the woman who had once possessed control, her spirit crushed beneath the weight of their collective violation. As the night wore on, the grim reality dawned on her. There was no escaping this descent, no turning back from the path she had been forced onto. The spiral of degradation had consumed her, leaving her trapped a prisoner of her husband's betrayal and the insatiable desires of his friends. Alexander, the orchestrator of her downfall, stood by a silent warden overseeing her demise, his eyes gleaming with a dark satisfaction as she was consumed by the darkness the night had been building to. Husband, inevitable climax that Victoria should have foreseen the moment she stepped into that den of vipers, but foresight, it seemed, was a luxury she had forfeited all along. They wasted no time, these predators. Their hands were ravenous, and their eyes were filled with an insatiable need. Victoria's body, overwhelmed by the onslaught of sensations, surrendered to the overwhelming tide of their desires. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if this was what it meant to lose oneself completely, to become a mere vessel for the gratification of others. Her mind was a blur, her thoughts fragmented and incoherent as they took turns with her, their bodies pressing against hers, their hands exploring every inch of her exposed flesh. Her body responded instinctively, betraying as the night progressed. Their acts became more forceful and their demands more persistent, forcing her deeper into the abyss of servitude and erasing the last traces of her identity. Victoria's emotions oscillated wildly, a sickening cocktail of pleasure and despair, a dizzying dance between arousal and degradation. With each passing moment her sense of self eroded, leaving behind only a hollow shell, a vessel devoid of its former essence. And then in the midst of the chaos, Alexander emerged from the shadows, his presence looming over Victoria like a predator closing in on its prey. He joined the fray. Victoria felt a weird feeling of relief that she wasn't alone in her degradation, but the awareness that her husband was an active participant in her humiliation only increased the misery that threatened to overwhelm her. His touch was both familiar and completely unfamiliar in this environment. The man who had promised to love and protect her was now a partner in her ruin. The irony of it all is awful. Twist the knife. Finally, as the night progressed, the frenzied energy gave way to tiredness, which replaced the unquenchable passion that had driven their wickedness. Victoria lay on the bed, her body displaying the traces of their violation. Her mind was a fractured landscape. The weight of her submission, the knowledge of what she had become descended on her like a smothering blanket, and the room fell silent. Echoes of their laughing and harsh remarks, fading into the background as Williams's friends departed one by one. Their expressions smug, their desires sated. Alexander approached her, his eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction as he surveyed the wreckage he had orchestrated. Victoria met his gaze, her heart heavy with the knowledge that this night had irrevocably altered the course of their lives. Her submission was complete, her spirit broken, and there was no escaping the darkness they had both embraced. His smile was slow and deliberate, a reality formed in the crucible of that night's events, a reality from which there was no escape.